Thank you for joining us today. It's really terrific to have Donté Hayes here speaking with us about his work. I just want to say a few introductions and some thank yous. I'd like to thank all of the artists who participated in the exhibition. It's been an amazing show, as well as the curators. Julia Galloway and Jill Oberman have done a terrific job. We also have a wonderful catalog if you get a chance to stop by the gallery and pick one up, or we'd be happy to mail you one. We are selling them for non-donors. And I'd also like to thank all of our donors, speaking of which, for their wonderful support, the Gertz Gallery Advisory Board as well, and the Parkland College Administration, as well as Donna Gertz, for whom the gallery is named, and her husband, Fred. We also appreciate the Illinois Arts Council, which is a state agency, and for their continued support. We not only get a program grant from the Illinois Arts Council for exhibitions like this, but we also get it for our Summer Youth Employment Grant, which provides funding for our paid internship for high school students in the summer. So we shout out to the Illinois Arts Council. It allows us to do events like these that are free and open to the public. I'd also like to thank Paula McCarty. I know she's out there in the crowd for all of her help as the exhibitions coordinator. She's magnificent, and I couldn't do it without her. She does a lot of our social media. And I'd also like to thank the planetarium staff. Eric and Waylena have been terrific at hosting us. So thank you so much to the William Starkle Planetarium. Gertz Gallery serves as a platform to exhibit contemporary art. We are a learning laboratory for our students, and it's critical that we exhibit and host programming that features professional artists so that faculty can use the gallery as an instructional resource, and our students and our entire community can experience the artwork in person and hear the artists speak about their process, their career, and their artistic journey, which is what Donté Hayes is going to do in just a minute. The current exhibition really does accomplish these goals. Our ceramics biennial, like I said, curated by Julia Galloway and Jill Oberman, is on exhibit through February 10th. We have an upcoming show, The Distance Between, which is a pretty interesting group exhibition that will be coming up next, with painters, sculptors, as well as photographers and some installation artists. But today I want to just give a short introduction to Donté Hayes. He's got an amazing, I saw his PowerPoint in advance, and so you're really in for a treat. Hayes graduated from Kennesaw State University in Georgia, and he has a BFA in ceramics and printmaking and an art history minor. I always like to promote the art history minors and majors. Hayes received his MFA and MA with honors from the University of Iowa. His recent exhibitions include group exhibitions at the Newark Museum of Art in New Jersey, the Trout Museum of Art in Appleton, Wisconsin, and the 2021 Atlanta Biennial at the Atlanta Contemporary in Georgia. Hayes is the recipient of a prestigious Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation Biennial Grant Award in 2022. The grand prize winner of the Coined in the South 2022 exhibition at the Mint Museum, and the 2019 winner of the 1858 prize for contemporary Southern art from the Gibbs Museum of Art. So we're really happy that he's had time to join us. I just also wanted to mention that he has work in several permanent collections, including the Smithsonian Museum, and he is represented by Mindy Solomon Gallery in Miami, Florida. So thank you so much, Donté, for coming and joining us today. It's really great to have you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you for everybody that's there. Let's get to work. As you say, let's get to work. I'm going to share my screen. Let's do this. All right, here we go. First of all, I just want to say thank you again, Lisa, for everything you've done for putting the show together, as well as the show wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for Julia Galloway and Jill Oberman and the amazing artists. So I'm really excited that Julia and Jill thought of my work to be a part of this show, and I'm really grateful to see like all the amazing art that's in the catalog. I wish I was able to see it in person, but it's exciting to be a part of it. With that said, let's sit back, relax. Those who are in the planetarium and those like myself or in the planetarium digitally, we're gonna get back and go to time and space. I'm going to take you back to the future. Future, 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 future. I say that because a lot of my artwork deals about the things that I'm interested in. Growing up, I was a sci-fi nerd. I love sports, but not everybody can be Kobe Bryant or LeBron James or Michael Jordan. I love basketball. But I'm only 5'9", so I can't dunk a ball. So I had to find other things that I could do other than just play sports. And for myself, it was art. I love art, and I got into art because of my love of science fiction. And that always came from Black Panther. Black Panther for me was like one of my favorite comic book characters. I have dyslexia, so it was hard for me to read, and it still does. I still find ways to figure out how to read words. And so like my parents were like, well, you like to draw, so maybe you should be interested in these graphic novels. So I was like, oh, that's smart. So that was a great idea. So that gave me an opportunity to be able to read and be interested in things. And that helped me grow into really getting into other things, not just comic books, but, books like Fahrenheit 451 was like one of the first books that like really like brought me to wow, like this is what the future could be. And now we're in 2024. We all have these wall screens, which we call flat screen TVs, but we all do now. But I think it's interesting that even now that we can see from the past that now the future is here. And something that was interesting to me that I would read all these great like sci fiction books from like Moby Dick, 20,000 Leagues Under Sea, stuff like that, and Fahrenheit 451. But I was not very many Black characters. And so like my parents were like, do you know Octavia Butler? And I was like, no, we never heard of her. We never read anything of hers in high school or anything. So they were like, so in the summertime, they would make me do book reports so I could be better at reading for the next school year. And my fresh sophomore year of high school, I read Parable of the Sower, and that like really changed my life. It made me think that, people of all colors have been here, will be here, and will be here in the future. And of course, I love pop culture, and growing up in the, late 80s, early 90s, who didn't like, Star Trek Next Generation? I mean, I never was down with Spock and them, but Star Trek Next Generation was always the cool thing. Geordi LaForge was like the man. And then like Worf, it was like seeing Worf was like a Black man to me too. So it was cool to see people of color, as well as Guinan, who was Whoopi Goldberg, played Whoopi Goldberg and Guinan on the show. So it was great to see Black people in the future. With that, I grew up. I was born in Baltimore, but I lived most of my life in Georgia. And I now live in New Jersey. But growing up in Georgia, when I was 18 years old, when everyone else was going to college, I didn't go to school. I said, why should I need to go to school for art? So, yeah, so I always say that I didn't even go to college until my 30s. And I bring that up to, even though I know this is a great institution and I feel like we can all learn from things, but you also can learn things even before you even come to school. And so as an artist, I was like, well, I want to be an artist. And I had a good friend that back in the day, his cousin was one of the members of Crisscross. So I know many of you might not never heard of Crisscross, but they used to wear their pants backwards. And so you can look them up on YouTube, and they were a big rap group back in the late 80s, early 90s to 2000s in Atlanta. And so I would do like posters for different hip hop um, artists, as well as different groups that would come in and out of Atlanta during the 90s and 2000s. And I would make their posters using printmaking, like linoleum blocks and wood blocks. So that's a lot of my interest goes from science fiction to hip hop culture to also history. I love all history, but I also really have been specifically interested in the Middle Passage. Growing up, like I said, all the way from kindergarten, even all the way to grad school, when we would talk about slavery, we would never say anything but yes, they came from Africa, then they came to the New World of the what we now call the United States or the Caribbean. But first of all, Africa is not a country. All right, I'm going to say that again really slowly. Africa is not a country. So what does that mean? Why do, when we talk about Africa, we don't ever even think about where in Africa these beautiful people who were enslaved from? I always was always thinking like that's a problem to me. How come I don't even know where they're from? And going through my own, you learn on your own, or if you're asking the right kind of questions, you find out most of those on those ships were from West Africa. But where in West Africa? So I'm thankful that my wife, I guess about 4 years ago, she had did an ancestry, and I found out that I actually have where I originally come from is actually Burkina Faso and Ghana. So I thought that was powerful that this is a place. What kind of things did they do? What kind of foods did they eat? Who were their kings? Who were their queens? Like how come I don't know any of those things? Like when we talk about um Greeks and Romans, we know so much about where their ancestries came from and where what they started from the beginnings to the end. But we don't know those things when we talk about Africa. Even when we go into art history, we really speak about Africa with Egypt, and then Egypt brings in Greek with the Kora and Kore instead of like, isn't Egypt also in the continent of Africa? But it's always said in a way that is like Western cultural. So that gave me fuel to start creating my own ideas of what I wanted to really make. And I started making work in, like I said, this is before I even started working in ceramics. I
Dante,
just,
I hate to interrupt, but I was wondering if you could turn on your closed caption.
oh, what? Where is that at? Oh, yeah, sure. Is it on? Looking on it. Can see it? Is it on? Hello?
I can't see it.
Hmm. I'm pressing the button, but is it on now or no?
I don't see it. Someone just requested. We're checking on our end. Thanks.
I pressed the button, but I don't know why it's not. And sorry about this for those who are listening and wanting to hear. This is just a part of, I don't know what's going on, why it's not working. Hello?
We're still looking into it. Sorry for the delay.
Well, I guess while they're figuring, I can continue the conversation.
Unfortunately, I don't think we can get it to work if it's not already working. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry for those who, I'll try to, well, I guess I'll continue. Well, yeah, so um, I didn't even start working in ceramics until 2015. So, like I said before, my background is basically in painting and printmaking and um, mostly woodcut and linoleum blocks. And so, I guess about 15 years ago, I started making these works based on these Ife heads that are from Kingdom of Yoruba, which is in Nigeria. And in 1910, between 1910 and 1912, the German explorer Leo Frobenius was exploring the ancient city of Yoruba, and they excavated these 12 bronze Ife heads. And instead of seeing these beautiful heads that were, seen, are made in a realistic form, he saw them as made by the lost city of Atlantis. This is and I thought that was pretty weird that even in Black Africa, he saw that he didn't see the beauty of the great cultures that they could create. He only could see that the Greeks must have came first. It must have gave them these knowledge base instead of seeing that Black people had their own cultural identities and their own cultural knowledge and skills. But actually, he believed that Greeks was the reason why it was done in a naturalistic way. So that really made me think about how I should push the work further. So this is a painting as well as a print that I created back in 2012, and I call it Universal Frequency. And I was thinking about how the Ife his was a form of knowledge that was lost because I didn't know about it. I had to learn all this stuff on my own, but it was also something that was re-explored. When people usually see these his, they see the lines in the face. They always think of that is a representation of scarification. However, that may not be exactly what that is. There's also many in the historian and history world also see that these are a form of showing the skill level of a king or queen or high level person in the courts, as well as the bourgeois of the people who were the main leaders of the ancient city of Yoruba. So they also see it as a way of showing the more lines you have, the more knowledge and the more power and the more strength that they have. So that was like wow to me when I read that statement, because that made me think of like just aesthetically, when I look at these heads, they also remind me the bottom of their necks reminds me of a light bulb. So when I made this piece, I was thinking about the enlightenment of learning something that I never knew anything about, that I had to learn this on my own, that self knowledge that you can get from learning about where you come from. So from there, I wanted to continue to push this idea further. So I made this wood linoleum block piece called Beacon. And I've never been to Africa, but my ancestry is. And so I was thinking about how could I put that in a a linoleum block piece. And that made me think of an idea of like going back to one of their headdresses and creating the headdress to create also a way of how we're like, just like how we are right now in this planetarium, that this is like a digital way of introducing each other to all over the world through satellite dishes and things of that nature. We can all be one. So I wanted to push this idea further and learn more about the kingdom of Yoruba and Benin City. And first of all, I didn't even know what their kings were called, and learning that they're called obas. And I thought it was striking to me to see that this is what a king in my ancestry would have looked like, and they still look like that today. They still wear this garb even right now, and I thought that was powerful. That I get to finally know what these kings and queens may have looked at like, and they still look like that today. The same headgears that they have now, or from the beginning. And there's not something else that I learned from doing my research, that just like how we know about all of the different emperors of Rome, from the beginning, all the way to the end with Constantine, they have the same thing. Every single king has been written down from every single generation, and you even can find out if they were a good king, a bad king, what are the different things they did. And I thought that was really powerful too, that I didn't even know this even existed. So that made me want to push my ideas even further. And in 2015, I started working in clay, and I started thinking that I couldn't make these pieces just in two dimensions. They needed to be seen in the round. So I started to think about that headdress, and that started to first make me think of, as you can see on this picture, it made me think of an astronaut helmet, going back to my ideas of like, where I came from, my interest of science fiction. But then I wanted to push that forward through my interest in the what happened in the Middle Passage, from those coming from West Africa to the New World of South America, the Caribbean, and North America. Some who were put into slave face masks so they would not be able to speak. And I thought that was deep too. So like taking away their power. So I wanted to create something that brought everything together. So I created these True King series, which I call them Afronauts. This is like one of the first ceramic works that I did in this series. And I called them the King series because I was thinking about how the power of creating a symbol of a bust, just like how you would see those busts in Ife, with those Ife heads showing the power of the kings and the queens and those who were in the rich, just like you would see those great heads in Rome, those busts in Rome for every single emperor. I wanted to create my own based on my love of comic books and my love of history. I wanted to create something of power. So that I also felt like that was kind of limiting, just creating something that was uh, figurative. And I felt like when you make something figurative, you're always creating already the narrative's already done. You already see what you see. You might see a comic book figure when you're looking at that, or you might see the slave mask, or you might see the Afronaut helmet, or you may those who know the history of the Oba's importance of their headdress, you might see that. But then that's it. That's all you think of. You don't think of anything else. You like move on. Next figure, next. So I wanted to push that forward, and so I continue to do my research and looking through things of West Africa, from Ghana, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and I was struck by all of the beautiful headdresses and the clothing that they will wear for all of their rituals and ceremonies. And when I was taught this in college and undergrad, we talked about all the rituals and what they meant, and then in grad school did the same thing. However, they never spoke it in a way that was like, these are traditional. This is not like something that you would go, and if you go to Nigeria now, you might not even see this. This is something that's a traditional thing. Like everyone isn't doing these amazing traditional hid guards. Also, it's just like, if for myself, I'm a Lakers fan. And if you wanted to know who I was, and if you saw me walk in the street and I had a Kobe jersey, you would know that, I was a Lakers fan. When you see these garbs, you know exactly what kind of ritual is being happened in those traditional settings. It is not something that is like a shock to those who are doing it, which I always thought was interesting, because this is not art to them. When we go to the Smithsonian, or we go to an art museum, and they say African art, this isn't art. This is actually something spiritual to them. They don't see this as something aesthetic. However, I wanted to take those beautiful textures and abstract and make it something abstract for those to create something that's artistic. Knowing that you see how the body suits also relate to the domiciles that they lived in, the mask that they create. I thought that was interesting, using the same materials to create multiple things, which become something of like, this is a part of the home. When we think of home, we only think of the domicile. We never think about the things that are inside the home. Or the textures that you have in a home, or the food that we eat in the home. We only think of a home as the building. So that made me start to think about the power of the architecture of the building then. So this is a from the Jola people of of Senegal, and they have these just like in what we call Caplovian and Implovian things in Rome when they would have the opening area and the water would come, the rain would come, and then they would have an area so that rain will be used for water and things. They had the same thing in West Africa, and I thought that was powerful too. I didn't know that. That made me also see like how even architecture can be a part of an abstraction idea of what is home. So then I wanted to push that idea further, like I was saying, what else constitutes the home? In West Africa, the women are the ones that primarily, and this is traditional now, we're not talking about in contemporary, we're talking about traditional, are the ones that create in ceramics. And their vessels are beautiful and they're all done with coil method. And so that made me think of like the vessel is not just a vessel to put, food and grain and water in, but it's also a vessel can be the way that we define who we are as human beings, because all humans are vessels. So from that, I wanted to think about this even further. How can I relate to a place where I've never been, but I'm reading all this information and wanting to know about where I come from, but never been there? And like, how do I make those connections? And the first thing I thought of was hair. And the reason why hair is so important to me as well is because growing up and now, um, my mom, she has mental health issues. And many of the times when we were growing up, she would pull her hair out and then she would leave it in different areas of the house. And for like some of my friends, they would be like coming over after like, sports or like going to the movies or something. And we'll go to the kitchen, have pizza. And they was like, oh my gosh, there's hair on the counter. And that never bothered me. That never made me scared. I was like, no, 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 it's okay. Let me clean it up. And because like that showed me that my mom was safe. She was there. So then it also made me think of like those TV shows on CBS, the NCIS shows. How do they find people? They always find a little follicle of hair. So that made me think of like even in your DNA, and I know, yes, I don't have that much hair. So, I did that for my art. But so that even also gives you the idea of like who you are. So the hair, different hairstyles made me even think about the travel on those middle passage ships from West Africa to the New World, and the lines in the hair, or also related to the waves in the water of the Atlantic Ocean. But it also reminded me of the thatched roofs of each of those beautiful domiciles. And also reminded me of the raffia on the mast. All these different things and these textures of the dress, the headdresses of the obas. All these things related to me. Then I was like, how do I push that together the opposite way? And the ruffle of a colonial shirt of the Enlightenment of bringing of that time of the United States becoming a country, and but yet we still had to battle enslavement. What were those? What kind of texture that related to? And that ruffle of that colonial shirt kind of reminded me of hair. It reminded me of the thatch roofs, the mask, and the domicile homes. All of these different textures all related to me. You can all see how they all look when you look at that ruffle of that line becoming one. So in grad school, as Lisa said, I went to the University of Iowa. And those who don't know, the university has one of the largest African objects in North America at the Stanley Museum. And so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go to Iowa, so I could do this research, and actually touch and actually see these beautiful vessels in person, not just on a screen or in a book. And so these works right here, I had the opportunity to choose images from their collection, the Stanley Museum collection, back in 2021, and create a piece for their new museum that recently opened up last fall. And I created this work and this is how I create the work, first of all, before I even show what the work looks like. But yeah, so I use these different Ghanaian pots as my inspiration for the work that I made for the Stanley Museum. And here's a little picture at a residency that I did in North Carolina that kind of shows how I make the work. First of all the work is coil based, just like the coils done in those Ghanaian pots. And then from there, I make the form. And then from there, I take a needle tool. So it's smooth. And the needle tool is like, it looks similar to a needle tool in printmaking. And that's, like I said, my background's in printmaking. Needle tool and ceramics is very similar. And I just make one mark at a time, creating that thatch raffia look onto the piece of the work. So now I'm going to speak a little bit of how I come up with these abstract forms. And yes, they're abstract. And so most time people always think, oh, you're making bodies. I am not making bodies. It alludes to the body, but not the outer body, really. It's more about the inner body. But I'm not using humans to make the forms. I'm actually thinking about my love of science fiction. So I'm thinking about robots actually to make these forms and shapes. And one of the biggest amazing shows of all time for me is Doctor Who. And they have a protagonist, which are the Daleks. And Daleks are place from evil beings from a different world and time and space, extraterrestrial those who come to different times and worlds in the Doctor Who world and says exterminate, exterminate, exterminate. And I was like, oh, that's deep. It's kind of very similar to the idea of like taking away people who have a space and then leaving them and then taking to someone else, or destroying a whole group of people because of who they are, because they think that they are the greatest um, uh, race. So I took that idea and I took that bulbous shape from those Daleks, because I thought it was interesting that they would have a bulbous, smooth shape, because that seems like that doesn't seem scary. So I took that idea and I wanted to push that forward. What's the opposite of the Dalek? How do you get away from anxieties and the day's stresses of life? And that made me think of another bulbous shape called the stress ball. And so I was like, oh man, when you're down, you would just stress, you go and get a stress ball, and then things will start to slowly go down, which is like the opposite of being, of thinking of something negative. And the reason why I was bringing that up, because I was looking at all those different coil pots and the different bulbous shapes on those pots, and how I could make my own visual language with these pots. So from there, I also wanted to take the idea, because I also love Legos. And so, yes, you're like, what does Legos have to do with the work? Well, it goes back to the idea of the home and architecture. How are you going to really create a new world if you do not have a foundation? And so I wanted to use the Lego brick form, the top of the Legos, as a way to make forms from. So from that, my first piece that I made of this whole concept was made in, I guess, 2018. And this is called, obvious Adalic. So I was thinking about the idea of cultivating. How do you cultivate something that is negative of enslavement and all those different systems that created that? But how do you make something that you can become something better? You can cultivate something from something bad to something good. And I wanted to show that sculpturally in the round, to think about all those different textures and strengths and powers that you get when you feel comfort. So from there, like I said, I made a piece back in 2021 that goes from my research that I did at the um, University of Iowa, and had the opportunity to create this piece for their new museum. And this piece is called Guardian. And what I was thinking about when I was making this piece was thinking about the idea of, like, this is going to be in a museum. How do we talk about these crazy times that we live in, the times of the past of all these systems that created, enslavement, to to after that, to having, being free, to then having Jim Crow, then to having um, the civil rights movement, to then in the 70s when we had the Black Panthers and many of riots because after the Vietnam War and things of that nature, and now even to today that we have new all the things after Barack Obama becoming president, to now to Black Lives Matter, to even to today that we live. How are we continuing to grow as people? How do we guard ourselves to not just see ourselves as like we did it, everything's great, we moved on, let's start thinking other things, let's become, but we can't do those things if we're not first better people. And that's how I try to see in my work. I want my work to get you back to the historical things of where we came from. This is not about just about Blackness, but I always was struck by when I see something that was created from those of African descent, that we only see it only as something that speaks to Black people. I wanted to create, because I didn't know all these great things about my ancestry, but you can use those things, that knowledge that you're given from all things. So I wanted to push this idea further, and I've been working primarily since 2018 in that clay that's once is brown, and then once it's fired to a certain temperature is actually black. So there is no glaze on any of the work. If those who have seen the show, if they were wondering if it was just straight from the clay. And so something that made me really think about like how I could push this idea to another level, it once again came back to the Atlantic slave trade and the Atlantic Ocean. And for myself, I know, yes, many people have always thought that, you know, when you see beautiful coral, people always, or some, at least myself, I always saw coral as white. I never knew that actually, if you see coral, that means it's actually dead if it's white. Coral is actually beautiful and amazing, has different colors and stuff. And I thought that was always crazy when I would go to different museums and stuff. And you know how you like go upstairs to the fifth floor first, or the fourth floor, the highest, and then take you all the way down, and then you finish looking at everything in the museum, and then you all the way, they always find a way to get you to the gift shop. And at the gift shop, I would see coral there and different like geodes and things. And I never even knew that coral was actually colorful. And so that made me start to think about the idea of material. And what if I started working in porcelain? And so I made this piece called Speak. And it was the idea of thinking about how we see colors, and also how we see material in ceramics. And the material portion is always seen as something pristine and beautiful and, expensive. The black clay is never seen in that way. And so I was thinking like, um, that's how can I make something with material to speak something about how we relate to each other? And so when I was doing this, I was actually thinking about coral and how like when coral turns dead, it becomes white. So it's just like so I took that connection of those beautiful enslaved Africans on those ships. If they were thrown overboard or they died going through the Middle Passage, or they went and they jumped overboard on themselves because they didn't want to live in enslavement, that they were now their beautiful color is no longer, and they're dying just in the Atlantic Ocean, just like the coral. So that's the reason why I created this piece. But then 2020 happened. And then so many people saw the same work and thought I was speaking to Black Lives Matter. And actually, I wasn't. But I could understand why, because they saw it, the idea of like the only time you see Black people's humanity is through death. And I thought that was a powerful way to explain the work in another way. So, like I said, I believe in research, and I do all of my work based on research coming from the ancestry of where I come from. And so it got me to thinking about Burkina Faso and the Boa people, and they have these plink masks. And since I was already thinking about the idea of how colors and material can create content, this the plink mask also made me think about a lot of things. The colors in the plink mask are black and white. And for most times when you think of the color black in historical context, we always see the color black as something of darkness and and something negative. But for Burkina Faso and the Boa people, the color black is a representation of illumination and enlightenment, and the color white is the representation of ignorance and chaos. And I thought that was deep, that you can't assume that just because you see these colors and you take art history that you always know what another culture is seeing those same patterns and colors mean. And on the right side, you see a plank mask that is called the checkerboard plank mask. And the checkerboard plank mask was something that I was really interested in because the not just about the colors, but also the idea of the checkerboard. The checkerboard to the Boa people was a representation of how we see life, just like us, that there's we live on a board. Life is like, there's time, you know, and our time, we never know when our time is going to end. Just like a game. When you play games, you don't know who's going to win and how long it's going to take to finish. And so that checkerboard is like a representation of like, are you going to live in chaos or are you going to live in enlightenment? Then the left side, it has another mask that speaks with the zigzag patterns, which speaks to the idea of knowledge base. So when you go up the mountain, it's like a representation of learning and becoming one with yourself in the environment and understanding new things. And then you're going down the mountain where the community is, where you get to teach and learn from all the things that you learned, and you bring that to the community. And then somebody else would do the same thing, and they will go up the mountain and do the back and forth. So the idea of like, you are no longer just a teacher or a student. You're both. You're both a student and a teacher. And I thought that was powerful, that we never think about ourselves as that we should always have a open life to feel like we can help each other and not just help when you find it needed. You can always learn from someone and grow from each other. So from that, I wanted to create a piece called Elevators because of my love of Outkast. And in one of their songs called Elevators, it spoke about the idea of like, now you know who I am, So you think that I have money and you think I'm doing great, but I go through the same problems like you do. So it was like the idea of like going up the mountain and thinking that, oh yeah, you're great. And then so when I come down, you should be giving me stuff. You should be. No, it was actually saying that we are all going through stuff. We all have ups and downs, traumas and joys. We shouldn't just be living our lives thinking that there's only two extremes. So that's the reason why I created this piece called Elevators. And I wanted uh see that how we live our lives in that way too, going up and going down, and how we're going to treat each other when we're up and when we're going back down. So now let's before we end, I wanted to speak about the work in the show. And I was really excited that I was able to show these two pieces. This one here is called Shield. And when first of all, it's funny when I say how I make the work. As you can see that they're all hand built that I show in the images, but I also am making work backwards because I see these as vessels. Because if you picked up the sculpture, there is no bottom. So if you flip this piece over, it would actually be like a vessel. If it was glazed inside, you could eat and drink out of it. So the three Lego tops is actually feet. I see them as feet flipped upside down. And it was like the idea of how we see life. We think that, because you're doing great, you're doing good, that means you have no issues. It's like more money, more problems idea. That just means that you have to protect yourself. That's the reason why I call it the peace shield. And the form is actually coming from my love of Super Mario Brothers and the game. Yes, I know, crazy. And I used to play this game called Mario Kart, and they would have like different players of Super Mario Brothers on Mario Kart little carts that you would do the race. And one of the characters was Bowser, who was a turtle that had like a turtle shell back that looked like this. So I thought it would be cool to create that shape as a form to speak on the idea of how we create shields and not even realize that our true shield comes from our foundation. And that's the reason why I made the piece upside down, backwards, because you do not truly know yourself if you don't know your foundation. So from that, here's the second piece, and this piece is called Sage. And once again, I was thinking about the idea of how vessels work. And like I said, all these pieces are, yes, abstract sculptures, but if you flip them upside down, they will also be vessels. And so that's like the headdress of like the oba would actually be the bottom if you flipped it up. And this piece was the idea of thinking about how we see knowledge, and like how everybody has these phones. Do we really consider that knowledge because we have all this information? I don't think so. I think a true sage is someone who has knowledge with the wisdom to understand that in order to really change this world, you have to really change yourself. And that's hard to do, to look at yourself and say what I can do better, and not look at others' problems and say that they're the issue. Maybe I'm the issue if I'm not doing the right things. So that brought me to something really powerful. Like I said, I love comic books, and Green Lantern is like one of the comic books that I used to collect. And I was at a residency, and it was my very first residency I ever been to, right out of grad school in 2020. And as everyone knows, what we're going through in COVID. And I never been to a residency before. I didn't know what it was like. And at this residency at Hambridge, and I definitely recommend anybody who's looking to go to a residency program, and it's in North Georgia, and it was dark. And it was powerful because like I never knew what it was like to live in a rural area and actually see nothing but the stars. And it was so dark that, you know, you have the flashlight on your phones. That didn't work. You had to get a real flashlight. I didn't, everyone was like, when you come there, they're like, you don't have a flashlight? You're gonna have a hard time going back to your cabin. I was like, nah, what are you talking about? I'll figure it out. I got my phone. It took a 5 minute walk from the main house where we ate to my cabin. Took like a 5 minute walk. It ended up taking me 20 minutes to get to my um, cabin because I couldn't see because it was so dark. The next day I went 20 miles to go to Walmart to get a real flashlight. And so for me, because I'm a sci-fi nerd and a comic book nerd, it made me think of Green Lantern and the idea of darkness versus light. So I made this piece called Lantern. And it made me think of, would anyone care that you're making work in dark? Does anyone care what you're doing each day when you as artists? Like, does anyone care what we're making? You know, you're doing stuff that is like deep, you know, and pushing yourself, you know, personally, maybe, you know, physically with the art. And does anyone care that you're thinking about these things? Especially when everything's going crazy with COVID and Black Lives Matter and all this other, and people are dying, and you're making art. Why is that important? You know, and so that's the reason why I made this piece called Lantern, because it made me think of like art can be important. Art can be an enlightenment place. For this object can be a place of understanding. These objects can be a vehicle for those who are struggling to see what they always thought in their minds but didn't know how to create, you know, physically. And so after that experience, being in that residency, it made me understand what truly is to be an artist. Is to sometimes be the person that's making work and not worrying about what's going on around you. If anyone understands it, it's more important is that you make that work, and it will show. It will be brightened. And with that, I want to say thank you, and I look forward to any questions or any comments about the show's work or the research that I've done. Thank you.